HCA Talks Health. I'm your host, Zena le Roux, and today we've got Ross Austen as our guest. So welcome, Ross.
Thanks, Zena. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Ross, it seems like you're quite interested in many different facets of health, right? So you're a functional and performance breathwork practitioner, and you really love educating people around the power of our breath. But you're also the founder of Honora Health, right, where you produce and sell award-winning kombucha. And you've got a degree in sports and exercise science, an additional qualification in applied sports and exercise nutrition. And also, if I look at your Instagram page, it looks like you've got a really big adventurous spirit as well, hey? So you like doing things like like cold water immersion. You're a firefighter, if I have it correctly. And you've been featured on some magazine covers. So it's really
Definitely,
quite
yeah.
an exciting combination of things that's going on for you.
Yeah, I've always been of the opinion, never be defined by a box or a piece of paper. Sometimes people go, "Oh, who are you?" And I really don't know what direction to take that conversation in. But I say yes to many different things and see where they go. And sometimes they're a complete car crash. Other times I get some incredible experiences and I meet some incredible people along the way. So yeah, life's for living, and highly recommend people to say yes and get out there and experience it. That's for sure.
Wonderful. Yeah. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit more about how you got to where you are today, and how these different elements of health piqued your interest over the years. So we'll go into all of them just now, but maybe just a overall idea of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Zimbabwe. So born and raised there. Lived there till I was 14. Lived in Malawi for 2 years and then moved over to the UK and finished my education. Sport was my first love. Absolutely love sport. As any sportsman or woman, I think they always strive to represent their country in whatever discipline that they choose. And I had those ambitions, but unfortunately they just didn't happen for me. So I thought, okay, if I go and do a sports and exercise science degree, maybe I can help the next generation of individuals get to where I wanted to be. So I love sports and exercise science. While I was there, I kind of threw myself at various research pieces and became just kind of up for anything that was happening. So I had the privilege of working with some of the Paralympic shooting squad ahead of World Championships. And as you know, individuals with spinal cord lesions actually struggle with heat acclimatization, or actually heat management, because they don't actually sweat below the lesion. So where their injury is, they lose the ability to sweat. So managing is really important in those conditions. So we got them in the heat chamber and acclimatized them to the heat in Cyprus. Actually, that's where the world champs would have been happening. Work with the likes of MK Dons, which is a football team here in the UK. So pre-season training and testing. And yeah, I just kind of said yes to lots of things. And during that time, we also did some sweat testing for a company called HFR Sports Science. And we were looking at sodium, potassium, and chloride and finding rehydration products that suited the sweat makeup of those individuals. As you know, everyone sweats different amounts and depending on seasonality and those sorts of things. And that was really cool work to be involved in. And then I was earmarked for what is called a KTP, so a Knowledge Transfer Partnership, which is a government-funded scheme here in the UK. And basically a third of your salary is paid by the company, by the university, and by the government to launch a particular product into market. And this was the sweat testing that we wanted to launch into market. So I went over there as a graduate scientist just to kind of learn the ropes initially. But eventually in the background, unfortunately, that business was up for sale and I wasn't aware of that. So I was getting experience in the laboratory, and then they said, right, the business is going or being acquired. And I was like, oh no, that's me out of work, because I came in here for this particular project that is actually being put on the back burner. But fortunately for my work ethic, they said, no, we'd like you to stay on. And I became a scientist and actually started testing sports supplements for drugs. So yes, there are athletes that consume drugs for performance enhancement, but unfortunately, there are a number of athletes that fail drugs test inadvertently. So they consume a protein powder, a pill or capsule, and that contains a steroid or stimulant or a beta blocker, a prohibited substance within the eyes or WADA, and they end up failing at drugs tests. And obviously, there impedes an investigation and they need to prove themselves innocent, but they are labeled a doper regardless of whether they took it by accident or not. So I worked for the testing side of that business for about 5 years. and still did some of the testing around sweat and saliva. So we did also some saliva testing, which is hormonal profiling. So looking at cortisol, testosterone, and some really interesting results around the menstrual cycle and the impact of that on performance and recovery, and how they can potentially kind of influence that heading into World Championships or Olympics. So it was really fascinating. But unfortunately, those services didn't take off. I was testing supplements for a number of years and realized that really I was quite hindered with my background. So a lot of the work that we're performing was forensic science, chemistry based, and I'm an anatomy and physiologist based on my qualification. So I took my skills and ultimately started building the business. So I looked after UK, Europe, South Africa, and India, just raising the profile of the Informed Sport program, Informed Choice program, and ensuring that the governing bodies of sport were aware that there is a solution to prevent inadvertent doping and reduce the risk associated with that. So I spent 9 years there. During that time, I also obtained my nutrition qualification. I was also part of the GB bobsleigh development squad because I just love sport and I saw an opportunity there. And kind of left that, took on a job that lasted 6 weeks. So I was fired within 6 weeks, which was pretty crazy. And it was like, okay, what next? But I also had created Honora Health while I was working at LGC or HFL Sports Science, just because love nutrition, and I had created a brand to go down the plant-based protein powder, but the upstart or the costs associated with starting that business were out of my reach. So I parked it for a year and then discovered kombucha in my travels in America, South Africa, and Australia, and came back to the UK. This was circa 2016, and it wasn't really accessible. And I kind of went on a journey of fermentation, and I've been brewing for 7 years and have a little business. And yeah, so I just try little things here and there, as and when they come up, kind of thing. And the cover model stuff is more so inspiring others to do things that everyone could do, basically, just an average individual that is consistent and keeps going to the gym and those sorts of things. So I try and keep nice, simple messages for people that we can all achieve lots of things if we just dedicate some time and be consistent and willing to fail and all those sorts of things.
Yes, and I think another great side to that is, adding lots of variety to your life, right? So you won't necessarily get bored, and I think that's the difference between developing some form of range over your life in terms of knowledge and education compared to necessarily specializing in one area, right? And I think there's benefits to both of of these options. But so I want to start with the breath, right?
Yeah.
So you're a functional breath practitioner, and it's said that we take around, is it 26,000 breaths per day? Yeah,
That's it.
So it's something that we do every day, but the question we need to ask is whether we are doing it effectively, right? So are we doing it in a way that can actually help to improve our health or actually aid performance? So this is what functional breathing is all about, if I understand it correctly. So can you tell us a little bit more about this and how people could benefit from doing it? So just give us an idea.
Yeah, so it's part of our autonomic nervous system, or it's autonomous. But it's amazing that we can actually physically and mentally take control of it to benefit us. So there's a spectrum of breath. You have the highly experiential kind of side of breath, and then you have the functional side of breath. So we're talking asthma, dysfunctional breathing, functional breathing, those sorts of things. And firstly, it all starts with the nose. So there's about 30 different benefits of breathing through your nose in comparison to your mouth. So it moistens and warms the air. You also have loads of little cilia in your nose, which are little fine hairs that actually remove bacteria and germs, so helping with immune function. You have an amazing compound called nitric oxide, which we as nutritionists know is consumed via beetroot and rocket to lower the metabolic cost of exercise, but we produce it in our nasal cavity. It was only discovered in 1995 that we did so, and that's a potent vasodilator. And so that helps the delivery of oxygen as well around the body. In addition to that, kind of slowing the breath down or breathing through your nose is ultimately allowing CO2 to build up in the system, and that's paramount. So the Bohr effect, people may be aware of that. And he was a scientist that discovered that better levels of CO2 led to better vasodilation, but also the dissociation of oxygen from hemoglobin to your cells. So what's happening is society in general breathe hard and fast, typically through their mouth. And as a result, they have chemoreceptors and baroreceptors in their body. And these are set to a certain level because of that hyperventilation. But you can use functional breathing to reset those chemoreceptors and baroreceptors to be more tolerant of more CO2 circulating in the system, which will allow better delivery of oxygen to the body, and also utilizing the nitric oxide present in our nasal cavity. So every nasal breath has nitric oxide, every mouth breath does not. Hence why it's really important to focus on nasal breathing. Now, I appreciate people go, well, I've tried that and I really struggle when I get to high intensity. And yes, I'm not saying that it's nasal all the time, but it's nasal most of the time. Because when we get to those really high intensities, our mouth has to come in just to kind of bring in probably that amount of air because we've got too much CO2 circulating. But then it's getting control of that breath and slowing it down, doing things like maybe many small breath holds. So that's holding your breath for 5 seconds, allowing that nitric oxide to pool, breathing that in, and kind of then managing or getting hold of your breath again is really important. And you can do that little exercise between sets and those sorts of things. So functional breathing is all about understanding the diaphragm, your tolerance, or getting a better tolerance to CO2, and also slowing it down. So cadence is really important. That 26,000 breaths, so we average between 9 to 20 odd breaths a minute, but the optimum is 4 to 6. Fascinating. And becoming aware of it and improving it has huge health benefits, from sleep to performance to stress management and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think not many people are aware of this. And just thinking about, why is it that more people tend to breathe through their mouths? I get that when performance, when it intensifies, it's kind of difficult, but just in general. So even if you're not an athlete, is it because of congestion, do you think?
So yeah, I have the term, if you don't use it, you lose it. So if you don't breathe through your mouth, well, if you breathe through your mouth, your nose becomes congested. But if you focus on breathing through your nose, that then is fairly clear. So that is the thing that is paramount ultimately. And I think it's just it's that awareness piece. So we can sit in front of the TV or the computer, and sometimes it's just easier to breathe through the mouth because we haven't been using our nose. So there's an incredible book by James Nestor called Breathe, and he goes on a 10-day or 20-day experiment where he actually tapes he blocks his nose and he only mouth breathes, and then he actually tapes his mouth. Obviously, he takes that tape off when he needs to eat and drink and those sorts of things. But the differences between the two are a day and night, really, in terms of his performance and health markers. So it just proves that nasal breathing is beneficial. Bearing in mind, there are individuals with polyps and issues with their noses. So contact sports, someone might have a broken nose, deviated septum. So it makes it difficult in those situations. But in general, most people should be able to breathe through their nose.
And I think one big area that most people can focus on is when they're sleeping, right? So trying to breathe through the nose at night. And one technique that you're also a fan of is mouth taping.
Definitely.
Right. So what difference could this make? What changes could you expect if you actually do the mouth taping?
I know
Use the
it
mouth
sounds a little
taping.
bit weird. You bring that up around the table and everyone thinks, well, we don't really know what you get up to on the weekends, kind of thing. But yeah, I'm only talking a bit of microporous tape. There is actually something called myotape created by Oxygen Advantage, which is the course that I've completed. And that goes around the mouth and allows you to drink and talk if you so please. But I started off with that. Men with facial hair really struggle because it just comes off. I then also had a little piece of just a microporous across the lips, but I was snoring out the side of my mouth. So I've gone across now. So nothing comes out. But I must admit, I discovered it in September last year. So I've been doing it for about a year now. And I feel much more refreshed. I no longer snore. My watch, even though it's not so accurate, is showing that I've got better REM sleep, which is the restorative phase of sleep. But at the end of the day, if you feel better, I think in yourself, then you know it's doing good for you. You're breathing to your metabolic needs. And yeah, hugely that snoring piece I think is really good because that's sleep apnea. And yeah, I couldn't speak better for it. So I would only recommend it for people that are snoring, that wake up with a dry mouth, because some people do generally breathe through their nose. So mouth taping is not for everyone, but it's something to try out if you have those sorts of things in the morning or throughout the night.
Yeah, awesome. No, I think that's a great technique to kind of start out with. And you mentioned some breathing exercises or something you can start with. Is there maybe a short breathing exercise you can share with us that people can start implementing into their lives?
No, for sure. So there's many different ways of breathing. So when we inhale, it's sympathetic. When we exhale, it's the parasympathetic side of the nervous system. So if you want to energize yourself, you focus all your attention on that inhale. So really quick in, so one breath. So in, out, those sorts of things will energize you for 30 seconds, basically. And that might be if you've got a lull in the afternoon, for example. But what I've seen in society is we are chronically stressed, and chronic stress is not the greatest thing to be having. Stress is a good thing. I think the narrative around stress may need to be changed, because when we exercise, we're stressing the body. That is a good stress, but ultimately we need to recover to then go again. So what's happening is stress potentially might be getting a bad word or a bad connotation, because we think we need to get rid of all stress. We don't really, because stress makes us action. If the deadline's coming, we might have to do the work and those sorts of things. So one way to kind of maybe de-stress, so if you're sitting in front of the TV, a 4-second inhale and a 4-second exhale will be really beneficial for you, because that is putting the autonomic nervous system in balance. So you're leading to homeostasis. So the parasympathetic and the sympathetic of the nervous system is becoming balanced. But if you want to go a step further from a relaxation point of view, so you can do that 10 minutes twice a day, which is beneficial. If you want to kind of increase on that relaxation point of view, really extend that exhale. So we're talking to 6 to 8 seconds. So breathe in for 4 seconds and out for 6 to 8 seconds. And what that's also doing is it's engaging the vagus nerve. Now that's the great wandering nerve in our body, and it improves vagal tone and all those sorts of things. So that really long exhale is hugely beneficial for us. And those are breaths that we can use even driving in your commute. I know sometimes, I don't know where you live in South Africa, Joburg traffic can be terrible. So managing your stress in traffic, so that 4 in, 4 out will be really beneficial. Get to the office not too stressed out. And those sorts of, you can do it while the kettle boils, while you're in front of the TV. I really encourage becoming aware of your breath and just putting in little practices that people are unaware of the fact that you're actually training your breath. I think with wellness today, it's like, oh, I need a yoga practice. I need a meditative practice. I need to move more. I need to sleep. It becomes really overwhelming. So something that's with us all the time, and little techniques that we can implement just when we're just chilling at the table or driving or out on a walk is really beneficial.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think it's very important to kind of tweak it according to where you're at, right? So depending on whether you need that energizer or whether you need to calm down a little bit, it's important to use the right type of breath in order to support that. But what you've just mentioned, so you've mentioned how, stress could be a good thing, right? And often we actually need to reframe it in a certain way to realize that it can also support us. So I think this is where the cold water immersion also comes in, isn't it? So it is quite a bit of a stress on the body.
Yes.
And I know that this is also used for mental health advocacy. So how does this work? Maybe you can share a little bit more in terms of how it can improve your mental health and how this stress is actually beneficial to the body, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I'm a huge cold water advocate. People find that a bit strange growing up in Africa in the heat. But I kind of discovered it about 2 years ago. So I'm part of a group called the Icebreakers in the UK, and it's a men's only group that goes swimming in the local River Avon throughout the year. It's kind of warmish at the moment, but it does get down to 2 degrees, I think we experienced this winter, which was pretty cold in the water. It's tough when it's minus in the air temperature. It's typically warmer in the water, which is crazy. But incredibly, it kind of gets you out of your mind. So that mental chatter sometimes can be a little bit too much for us. And getting into the cold completely removes you from your mind. You're focused on the cold. It's sore. I'm not going to lie, it does hurt on occasion. And I always recommend people probably give it 3 attempts. It's not for everyone either. So at least give it 3 tries. And if you don't enjoy it, then happy days, and that's fine. There's other things that you can pull on in terms of your toolbox when it comes to mental health. But community is a big thing as well. So getting together with other people, always recommend cold exposure with someone else, because your body can react in a bad way to it on occasions. That's happened to people. And I think it's also just being out in nature, and those sorts of things. Then we've also got the walk. So typically I have to walk down to the river. So there's a little bit of exercise there as well. And it's just an incredible start today. So community, that getting out of your head, that improvement in kind of what's it called? The anti-inflammatory benefits as well. So there's all those parts. There's still lots of information to come out of cold water exposure, and the research is still catching up. But again, it's how you feel after it. You've conquered something that's really hard. So resilience is a big thing as well. And people just feel incredible after they've come and got out. It's like a post-runner's high, actually. That's how I kind of try and explain it. But it's not always comfortable. And we do live in a very comfortable world these days. We can turn lights on as we please. We can flip a switch and we get a hot house. I appreciate it's not everyone, but yeah, comfortability is there. So resilience is a big piece as part of that as well.
Yeah, so I think it's once again it's all about balance in terms of, you know, how much stress do you already have in your life, and taking into consideration that some of these techniques, also something like fasting, you know, fasting is great. It could be, you know, fantastic for the body, but it is also, you know, like a mild stressor. So taking into consideration, if you already have quite a stressful life, you know, is cold water immersion and fasting and you know, many of these different techniques in combination may be the best fit, you know. So just looking at that, but also it could benefit you if you are already stressed. So I guess it's figuring out that sweet spot in your own life and how much you can handle, right?
No, definitely. It's that awareness piece. So as anything in life, there's certain things that each individual enjoys over others. And so having a toolbox of things that you can pull on as and when you need them is really beneficial. I'll never say that there's one thing that's going to sort you out. But if you have, no, today I'm not really feeling a cold water swim, but maybe I'll do some breath work this morning, all those sorts of things. Because there are occasions where I don't really want to get up in the middle of winter and go and jump in a river. Okay, sometimes when I have done it, I feel much better, but it's okay, what else can I do in order to kind of help in that respect?
Yeah. So having that awareness and also listening to your own body, right? So you also talked about earlier, you talked about when we exhale, how we access the vagus nerve and the vagal toning and so forth. So I think, you know, when we look at the vagus nerve, we know that the vagus nerve connects the gut and the brain, right? So it's the whole gut-brain connection that we read about quite a lot. So I guess the link with the fermented foods business is also related to the vagus nerve and how the gut can impact the brain and also the rest of the system. So yeah, was this kind of part of the idea when you started the fermented foods business, or not necessarily?
No, so it was definitely an addition to that. So I started Hinora Health way before I started my breath work. So I had been doing my kombucha probably for about 6 years before I decided to add breath work to the mix. Now, the reason why I did that is I can only produce certain amounts of kombucha, and I felt breath work really synergized with my brand and my kind of message. So I was like, okay, I'm really fascinated and interested by it. So that's kind of get qualified and educate people in it because of the benefits that come with it. And definitely the gut brain axis and the vagus nerve were connected. So that was my thinking alongside it. So we can influence things. So when I actually run a couple of workshops where I'll do some breath work beforehand, and then I'll teach individuals how to make kombucha and water kefir. You can make it at home and those sorts of things, because it is an easy beverage to make at home. Initially, I didn't make it it wasn't very nice. My friends and family were far too complimentary. So over the years, I have refined it to be a very good tasting beverage.
Good.
But yeah.
Yeah. So I think what, I love the idea of taking all these different elements into consideration. But if we are going to have fermented foods, I mean, of course, that's great, putting live bacteria back into the gut. But it's
Yeah.
also important, and I guess you're also a fan of this, of eating real, proper food, right? And I know that you do champion a whole food diet. So can you tell us a little bit more about why you find that this is important, that the way we're eating obviously plays a role, but specifically when it comes to gut health and overall well-being?
Yeah. So if we look at goodness, the developed world and refined foods, I think we've got a huge fiber gap in the UK, and I'm not sure in the statistics in South Africa, but it's recommended 30 grams of fiber per day, and I think on average the UK population is hitting 11 grams, so below half. And some researchers are saying we should probably be at 50 grams rather than 30, because fiber is really important for gut health. It helps with the obviously removal of kind of transportation of food through the system, but also we don't digest that fiber, so it gets to the colon, so the distal part of our stomach, and that's where the majority of our microbiome is housed. And our microbiome then feasts on those in a synergistic relationship, so creating vitamins and minerals, so things like short chain fatty acids, which are starting to prove huge benefits in terms of mental health, serotonin. If we also think about looking after our microbiome with better food, or then we'll have a better immune system. So 70% of our immune system is housed in the gut. So if we choose processed foods over and above real whole foods, then we are not feeding our microbiome appropriately, and that could lead to ill health and various other things. But we also need to look at the quality of food, because unfortunately it's yield over quality these days. So people are growing food really fast. So there's great to see there's like regenerative farming coming back in, and the quality of the soil obviously provides the quality of the fruit and vegetables and those sorts of things. So I just champion that. I'm not saying that you can't treat yourself here and there. It's that 80-20 rule. Because we also talk about, it's quite interesting how we kind of frame alcohol. But if that, in the UK, pubs are really kind of obviously part of culture. But if that one drink brings you to a community, can have huge impacts on your mental health over and above other things. So there needs always to be this balance. We can't have this kind of, it's never this black and white thing, which we all love. We want yes or no. Can I do that? Can't I do that? But it's just this balance of, okay, yeah, no. Most of the time, I eat a whole food diet. Occasionally, I might slip a cake in here and those sorts of, and that brings enjoyment and brings people together from the community, particularly if you're sharing that together on a birthday or something like that. So
Yeah, and I think it's so important what you're saying in terms of, it could actually add stress to your life, or take you away from the community, which is really supportive, could be really supportive to your health and overall mental well-being, if you're too strict around your food, right? So it's that balance is key. But something that I'm curious about, so I know, like I mentioned earlier, you were featured on some magazine covers, right? So do you feel like when we're eating for health and when we're eating to look a certain way, that it can link up, or not necessarily?
it depends, I suppose. Contextual is really key with that, with regards to that question. So I competed as in a bodybuilding competition.
Yeah,
I would say I was healthy.
yeah,
I drank, like, I water loaded, very high in protein. Probably diet was devoid of fibers, so gut health probably wasn't the best either. So just focused around how much protein can I get in to maintain my muscle mass and obviously increase it as well. But maintenance was key when I was dieting down. So I wouldn't say that was very healthy. And also when we look at kind of endurance sports in particular, they don't necessarily want to have fiber in their diet because that's a weight and the power ratio is key when it comes to particularly cycling. So sometimes they remove that. And again, high kind of carbohydrates utilized throughout. We're talking 60 to 90 grams. And then you've got your even teeth health or mouth health. And so, yeah, it depends on the situation. Of course, calorie wise, particularly for that ultra endurance or high endurance sports, they do need to eat a lot of food. But is it healthy? Debatable, unfortunately.
Yeah, kind of depends on how you're doing it, right? So you worked in the sports supplement industry for quite a few years, as you shared with us earlier. So is this something that you would still recommend? You know, when you are eating a quality whole foods diet with all the fermented foods, etc., is this something that you would still recommend to people to use a sports supplement?
So again, it depends on goals. So protein is obviously, protein powders can be shrouded in a bit of like, oh, this is bad for you, but they are amino acids at the end of the day, and they can be convenient as and when. So I utilize a protein just to bump up certain meals or as a snack between certain things. Supplements in general, I think, like for example, omegas, incredible. And if you don't eat enough fish, you can either have that obviously from a fish source or an algae source. So those are really integral. Creatine's another really important supplement. I feel I take that daily because I don't get that enough through meat. You can find it in kind of some crustaceans and meat, so steak and those sorts of things. So 5 grams a day, and that's one of the most researched supplements out there. So that can go into smoothies or eat just into some juice and water. Just because I think it's really important from brain health and muscle health and all those things. And as we age, sarcopenia is a big thing. So if we can retain our muscles as we age, that will help us healthily age ultimately. So they do have their place. Multivitamins, it's more of an insurance policy with that, because if you are eating loads of different fruit and vegetables, you may not necessarily need to take that. And that's where I recommend 30 different plants across the course of the week, because you have all those different phytochemicals and fibers and all those sorts of things that do help your gut health. So that is one of the factors that a lot of the gut health researchers kind of recommend, 30 different plant fibers or plants across the course of the week.
Yeah. So if you ate broccoli on Monday and you eating it again on Friday, then it counts as one, right? So it's different types of plants throughout the week. And I think herbs and spice or herbs also counts as a
They
different.
do. They're not quite a full point, but they're like a quarter or half a point. So yeah,
Okay.
just some herbs, some kind of nuts and seeds on salads and all those sorts of things. So get really creative, get explorative. That is the problem with humans. We love habits. So kind of we like our meal on the Monday and the same meal the next Monday, and that's fine. But try bringing kind of different fruits and vegetables that you may have not had before.
Yeah. I think convenience is also a big thing, hey, that comes in the way. It's like we need the quickest, fastest option. Don't always have the time to think of new options, but that's, it's going to benefit you in such a great way. So making that time to be creative and to go to the shops and buy different types of veg, it could really make a big difference in your health and well-being. So what I'm curious about, and this is the last question, is just, how do you bring all of this together? So thinking about, your own, maybe a typical week. How do you bring all of this together in terms of foods and fermented foods, maybe cold water immersion? How does it look? And the breath, of course, just to get an idea of how to pull all of these different elements together.
Okay, cool. I mean, discipline and habits are key. Kind of we tend to go, I'll rely on my motivation, but motivation is finite, unfortunately. I kind of, with the firefighting, I've got a purpose and a reason to stay fit. So I tend to go to the gym first thing in the morning. I used to get up pretty early, but I kind of get up at about 6 o'clock. I'll have a coffee, I'll head to the gym, and I train fasted. And the breath is with us all the time. So when I'm training, I'm typically trying to maintain nasal breathing. In between sets, I can do my mini recovery breaths. So that's the hold for 5 seconds, and then breathe normally for 10 seconds and hold for 5 seconds and those sorts of things. But the breath can be trained whenever. So kind of slowing it down and being aware of it. Come over and have breakfast. I normally go cold water swimming in the river on a Wednesday and Sunday. But if you can't get to a cold water source, turning the dial on your shower down to cold or zero is good enough ultimately to give that initial shock. And there is evidence that actually, I think there was a research paper that showed that individuals that had a 30-second cold shower reduced their incidences of colds and coughs by quite a substantial amount, which is really fascinating.
Wonderful.
I'll try and dig that out for you, and if you want to share that.
Yeah.
But yeah, cold showers, exercise, and then because I actually ferment from home, so my garage is my brewery. So I've always got various living things on the go in the kitchen. It's a bit like a lab, much to the detest of my wife. But I normally have a fermented drink, whether it's water, kefir, or kombucha, or I've got a hibiscus soda that I play around with. I've made a ginger bug, for example. So yeah, I've always got at least a fermented drink going. I don't eat many fermented foods, and I need to change that. I'll buy them at some markets and those sorts of things. But then in general, when we also write our meals, we actually do a 2-week meal plan. So we know ahead of what we're doing and try and change things up and try new recipes and all those sorts of things. So that's the organizational piece. And yeah, sitting down and going, right, we're going to be, are you out this evening, or what do we need to do? A little easy meal here and there. And so that's really, really good. So that's my day to day. So exercise in the morning, maintaining nasal breathe most of the time. So this is actually a sympathetic. If you talk publicly for long periods of time, so if you're a teacher, you're engaging the sympathetic side of the nervous system quite substantially. So then bringing it back down is really beneficial for you. So then engaging that sympathetic, so that long exhale at the end of the day, before bed, those sorts of things will really benefit you. But yeah, that's kind of what my day to day looks like.
Yeah, and it seems doable. I think it's, and you're right, creating those habits to make it more sustainable and finding ways to make it fit into your own life, right? I think is what's most important. And I'm really such a fan of a multidisciplinary approach, when it comes to health and when you're on a healing journey. And I think it's fantastic that you kept on searching for more, and you kept on searching for different methods to use to kind of get the most out of life, right? So often we need these different strategies in order to bring balance back into the system and to be able to enjoy a quality life. So thank you very much, and thank you for sharing all of your all the knowledge with us. And so just lastly, just before we end off, where can people find you?
Yeah, so kind of most of my stuff's on Honora Health. So Instagram is probably the most active platform for me. I've tried TikTok, but to be fair, I kind of stick with Instagram. And then yeah, my website's honorahealth.co.uk. But of course, depending on where you're based, products can only really be purchased in the UK, to be honest. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate the invite onto your show, and I really enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ross.